Michelle, are you ready?
I was born ready.
She's an award-winning author, speaker, and podcast host who serves on the National Faith Advisory Council. She supported Donald J. Trump for president before it was cool, from her she shed in her beautiful backyard. This is the Michelle Moore Show.
Rising up, took my chances, went the distance, will to survive. So many times you trade your passion for glory. Don't lose your grip, keep them alive. And he's watching us all with the eye.
Face to face, out in the heat, hanging tough, staying hungry. Face like the odds, still we take to the street, overkill with the skill to survive. It's the eye of the tiger, it's the thrill of the fight, rising up to the challenge of our rivals. And the light, no survivors, watch us spread in the night, and he's watching us all with the eye of the tiger.
And he's watching us all with the eye.
Hi, everybody. So glad that you're with us today. I'm really excited about today's guest. I got to tell you, I'm very excited. Okay, so much to unpack and uncover today with Zech Shelton. So just in case you don't know who Zech Shelton is, Zech was an FBI agent for many years, decades actually, and he's now retired, but he has spent really a couple of decades doing extensive research into the Kennedy assassination. He's fascinating to speak with. Obviously, after I'd spoken also with so much with Rose Sheremy, I thought, oh goodness, my mind was being blown between the two of them. I really didn't hear a lot of the different details that I ended up learning. Zech was in a documentary called The Grassy Knoll. I highly, highly, highly recommend that. The link is already for you in today's show description. Now, I think I'm hearing you have to pay for it, a couple of dollars. It's not much, but it is an hour of jaw-dropping details that I had no idea about. So first, before we bring him in, though, I just want to let you know, Mike Gill, our corruption whistleblower and truth talker, he's going to be here tomorrow. Monday is going to be Labor Day. And so we will not be doing a brand new show. We'll actually do a documentary. I've already been talking with Ron about what that looks like. And then we're going to have Flashaganza on Tuesday. So those with you with fur babies, you're going to want to be here or be square. For your kitty cats and your puppy dogs, it's Flash's 6th birthday. And so we're celebrating Flash's birthday by giving away all different kinds of goodies and showing all different kinds of funny cat and dog and different pet videos. And so we're going to be, there he is, there's the man. And so Mama's little boy, I call him Big Boy. And so Mama's big boy is what I call him. And so Flash is having this big 6th birthday, the big 6. And so we are celebrating. Oh, it's going to be fun. I've been picking out stuff for like 3 weeks, y'all. And so it should be a lot of fun. And so I'm loving it. Okay, so we've got that. I wanted to make sure to remind you. I've even heard of people talking about taking off of work, which is just crazy. You have to watch it live because everything's going to be given away during the show. I can tell you we have spared no expense. And so it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Well, let's go on ahead and bring in Zach. He's probably thinking, what in the world is she talking about? Her dog is turning 6 and she's having a flashaganza.
How did you guess?
Yeah, so I have a fur baby. I tell my kids I have 2 sons, they're 18 and 20, and I tell them that my favorite child is Flash, and they both already know it. They say, "Don't even tell us, we already know." But Zach, thank you so much for being with us today. So as I was saying before we brought you in, and I know you were able to hear, that you just talking about you having been a retired FBI agent and then getting into all of this extensive research, but about the JFK assassination. But before we get into the JFK assassination, I want to talk a little bit about you. And so what got you to being an FBI agent, and how did you start realizing about Kennedy and all that? To kind of fill us in a little bit.
Sure, Michelle. I grew up in a very strict home, and I came home one day after working offshore when right after I graduated from high school. I was a basketball player, and my father told me that God has answered prayer, and I said, "Well, what is that?" And he said, "Well, you got a basketball scholarship." I said, "Wow, where?" And he said, "A junior college." And I wound up going, and I was headed to LSU. In fact, I loved the Eye of the Tiger when it came on. I'm used to that, playing it at Baton Rouge. But so I went, and I had to stay at home to do it. And the center on the basketball team was talking about going to the FBI when he got through being a clerk and finishing school at night and becoming an FBI agent. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I did it. I went to Washington in 1970 and started immediately into American University at night. And I worked and wound up being a lab technician in the lab for a great individual.
Okay.
And I found out after my second semester at American that they did not accept my credits and from the junior college. So that was right during Vietnam, and I went out and joined the Marine Corps Reserves. So I did 6 months active duty, went through Paris Island, and came back, got my job back. But I was really anxious to finish school, and the agent I worked for got me a transfer back to the New Orleans division. I went from a GS5 to a GS3, burning trash and filing indices cards, but I was able to finish school the following year, and I became an agent in 1973. And I went
Okay.
to Kansas City, my first office, and I worked the organized crime, the mafia, the Kansas City mob in Kansas City. And when I transferred to Chicago, I worked the Chicago mob. And that's when I came across some information about an individual named James Files, who was a subject of mine. He would kidnap or hijack tractor trailer loads of goods and bring them back to Melrose Park in Chicago, which was a mob-controlled city, and fence them. And we were able to get an undercover officer into him. And Files had made the comment that to one of his cohorts, he also had stolen cars going down to Dallas, that they driving through Dealey Plaza, and this cohort told me that one day he became weird on him and made a comment that if the American people really knew what happened, they wouldn't be able to handle it. I didn't write it down at the time because it meant nothing to me at the time. I was an FBI agent. We did our job. Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. So I mean, it just didn't even register with me until 1992. But it kind of bothered me a little bit. I read a book called The Hoffa Wars, And in the Hopper Wars was a chapter called the Conspiracy or Not. And it was all about Jack Ruby making numerous calls to the mob before the assassination and right after the assassination before he killed Ruby. And that puzzled me because we were told that Jack Ruby didn't have organized crime ties, which is total bull. And I said, how come we didn't notice these toll calls going to guys like Leonard Patrick, who was a hitman for the Chicago mob during that period of time? So that got me to thinking. And then when I saw this newspaper article about the Chicago mob being involved with Johnny Roselli and Chuck Nicoletti, I said to him, I said, those are real people. And I met with the private investigator that the article was about his information that he had came up with. And I talked to his source, who basically lied to me about one aspect of it. And I felt sorry for the guy, and I told him about files. Well, this guy, Joe West, a private investigator out of Houston, found Jimmy Files in prison in Joliet. And he started talking to Joe West, Files did. And that's how I became interested. In fact, I was supposed to go talk to him as an FBI agent in 1994, and it didn't happen because Dallas found out about it, and they contacted Chicago, and 2 other agents were instructed to go. And the instructions were, there's a nut in Joliet prison. Said he killed the president. Go talk to him.
Okay.
If that was told to me, I'd go prove him a nut.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then when I retired, there was a producer out of California that got in touch with me and asked me to help him. And if I could, in fact, Dick Clark was the person, Dick Clark Industry was going to do a special on Jim Files. And that didn't happen in 1994, but they knew the information came from me about Files. So he got in touch with me, and a individual out of the Netherlands, out of Holland, financed, and I traveled all over the country talking to former CIA, former FBI, and former mafia figures to come up with what was in the documentary. So that's basically how I got involved.
Okay. That's so interesting. When I watched The Grassy Knoll, I really didn't know anything other than, what the media has, shoved down our throats, really. And so I was such a great clean slate in a lot of ways. Obviously, I've known in the last 5 years, I've been finding out, okay, well, this wasn't necessarily what I thought or whatever. And was it the driver? Was it this? Was it that? And we'll get to that in a little bit. But what I thought was interesting is I started noticing as I was watching the documentary, which it's just an hour, that I was having one shocker after another. And so what I decided to do was to go back, and I watched the movie, the documentary the first time, and 10 minutes into it, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to go back and watch this with pen and paper and take notes. So by the time I got done with it, I went back and I wrote a whole list of shockers for me. And I thought, this is where the show is. I want to talk about the things that I'd never heard, because if I haven't heard them, I'm kind of my benchmark a lot of times. And I think, well, if I haven't heard this, there's probably a whole lot of other people that haven't heard it as well, or they may have heard some of it, but not all of it. And I thought, this is great. And so with you being in the Grassy Knoll and being so well educated on all of this and researched on it, I thought this is my chance to really get to speak with you about this. Also, just because of your experience within the FBI, I thought it was very interesting. So I want to start with my first shocker. So with that, I was shocked to figure out and to realize how much geopolitics played a role in what was going on. So in the beginning of the movie, it talks about that, and I wrote some notes down. So in 1961, when it became apparent to the world that the Bay of Pigs invasion was a thinly disguised attempt by the United States to invade Cuba. So Kennedy had declined to use the full might of the U.S. military. And this angered the people at the Pentagon and the CIA. So not only, so our president, Kennedy, was having some issues. And we were, because he's like not coming along with what everybody was wanting when it came to the war mongers in Washington and at the Pentagon and the CIA. And so I'm not sure where he went. So let's see here. I guess we lost him, producer Ron. So he'll come back, I'm sure. So I thought this was very interesting. Now he knows this part already. So, because we talked about it. So I'm going to keep going. I had no idea how much the geopolitics really played a role in this. And so it really was shocking to me to understand all this. Okay, Zach. So the CIA, had already really been operating in a way that didn't have the checks and balances on them. And Kennedy was embarrassed by many of the CIA operations. And so I thought that was all very interesting. And so, but it all goes back to the geopolitics. There's other stuff that was going on internationally, but I thought that was interesting. A lot of it led to Cuba and obviously with the Bay of Pigs. And so I thought that was interesting. The CIA had falsely anticipated that by doing all of this, that Cuba would rise up and they would turn on Castro. And that was a bitter failure for them. And so that was the first issue. I was surprised that this really set the stage for where a lot of Kennedy's issues with really the mob, because later, you end up finding out that 3 different major mafia figures had been discussing assassinating John Kennedy and or Robert Kennedy back in the spring of 1963. So he was assassinated. For those of you that don't know, John F. Kennedy Jr. John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November the 22nd, 1963. So you're talking about the spring and summer before. So you're talking about a good 6 to 7, 8, 9 months before, right? And so you're talking about Jimmy Hoffa was one of them. But then there was a guy that was out of Tampa, Florida, and he was organized crime. He had been in Cuba, had a bunch of stuff going on down in Cuba, and that went south, I guess, through the Bay of Pigs. And so there were some people with some big grudges, but it went back to geopolitical stuff. And that was a shocker for me. Makes sense. I just didn't know, never heard any of that, Zach. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we have to understand that prior to the election, Joe Kennedy, who was very connected to politics, actually flew to Chicago and met with Sam Giancana. And he knew that Cook County, Illinois, which is Chicago, would carry Illinois and needed the support for John F. Kennedy, which they promised, but he also promised them the White House if they would. And basically,
what does
they
that
did.
mean? What does that mean?
Well, it mainly would not mess with them, basically.
Oh.
The Justice Department did not mess with them. So, within a year, Joe Kennedy had a stroke. And Robert Kennedy started going after the mob. In fact, really nobody had ever done anything. The FBI definitely didn't until that particular time when Bobby was coming after him. And they felt betrayed, the mafia, and especially Chicago. And if you have to understand that Carlos Marcello out of New Orleans was actually kidnapped or whatever, picked up off the street from Bobby Kennedy and taken down to the jungles of Honduras and dropped off. So he didn't like him. Matter of fact, a lot of people have asked me, who killed Kennedy? Well, I said, name them, step in line, because there was a bunch of people that didn't like Kennedy. And number one was the CIA. Number two, you got J. Edgar Hoover that was not going to have his job anymore. That Johnson, after he became president, said you can stay director of the FBI until the day you die. You had the oil people, because he was going to take away that, basically start taxing them on the oil. You had, there was just a bunch that wanted him gone.
Yeah.
And
well, he already made the military mad. So the military is involved,
right.
as well. So that's what I was talking about earlier. So I thought that was interesting. He wanted to pull out of Vietnam. That's well documented. And so you already had that as well. So you had chiefs of staff were upset about that. and which again goes back to military. So that was all very interesting. I did not know all of this backstory. So again, as much as I've learned through this whole process of me finding out about the truth about our media, our healthcare system, everything else, it was like, okay, this is making sense. So I thought that was my first shocker, was just the geopolitical ties and how all of that happened. Now, I had never heard that the mob helped Kennedy get elected until I guess it was about 6 or 7 years ago. And so I didn't know that. And so I thought that was interesting. And I knew specifically that Chicago had helped. So in this movie, in this documentary, which again, we're covering some of it, but you guys, I highly recommend everybody watch it. But they did a great job with it, because they get so much in such a short amount of time, but yet lay it out so well. So the mafia, like we were talking about earlier, meeting with Daddy Kennedy, Joe, that was a surprise, and like you said, essentially just promised the White House to the mob, and everything was going fine apparently until Bobby became the attorney general. And then at that point, he started going after the mob. And so that became a big issue. And that's, what it is. And so I thought that was very interesting that, there were those ties with the mob, especially with Daddy. Now, I didn't know about the stroke timing. I knew that Joe Kennedy had a stroke, but I didn't know that it was during this time frame, which makes sense now that you had said that it was a year into John F. Kennedy's presidency that stroke happened. So it makes sense. So they didn't have to really worry about keeping Daddy Kennedy happy, apparently.
Correct. Exactly.
Makes sense.
And it's not the fact that they did get Kennedy elected. They thought they did. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone knows that Chicago, Cook County is what put him over the top in Illinois.
Yeah. And that was a close race. In the movie, you find out some details about the stats, which are pretty incredible. Obviously, there was some funny business or something going on. So, everybody will get to hear about that when you watch the movie. Then also, shocker number 3 for me was J. Edgar Hoover. I didn't understand I did not know that there wasn't really any kind of a love loss between Kennedy and Hoover. John Kennedy and Hoover didn't like each other, apparently. And so if he would have gotten reelected, John Kennedy, Hoover was going to be gone. And instead, what happens is John Kennedy gets shot and assassinated, and Johnson comes in and gives him a permanent deferment. So explain that, if you would, please, Zach.
Well, I can't exactly say that I knew that he had a permanent deferment, but he was going to be director of the FBI as long as he was healthy and kept on going. And that's what Johnson basically, I think, promised him, is that as long as he's healthy, he could be director of the FBI.
Yeah, it's amazing. So
otherwise, John Kennedy was going to get rid of him, though.
Okay, so how was that known? It was mentioned in the movie, but was it just openly known within the FBI and those in Washington that Kennedy didn't like Hoover, and what was going on there?
Well, let's just say that's what I heard. Okay, and it makes sense to me. And I heard there was a red phone direct line to Bobby to Hoover, and when that thing blinked, he had to answer it. And once John died, that phone was pulled out of his office.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. In the movie, it was even commented that, he let Bobby know that John had passed away, and President Kennedy, and that was the last time they spoke. So that's in line. That's interesting. Okay, so the next thing that I thought was interesting, shocker for me, was number 4. Of course, we know about the Texas School Depository. So for those that don't know, I want to make sure we cover this. And that's supposedly where Oswald was located. But then we have the Grassy Knoll, which is the name of the documentary. And that's the slope that is north of the Triple Underpass in Dallas, Texas. Well, what surprised me was that many people reported that shots had been fired from both directions. I had never heard that. And so I thought that was interesting. And so I didn't know that there had been a lot of uproar about how many shooters there were. Again, you don't ever hear that in the news. And so I thought that was interesting, that there were many people that were there that were witnesses. And even later, you find out that specifically people had given affidavits. And when the final affidavit would come out, they had been edited. And so people, testimonies that are accounting of what had happened got changed by somebody. And so whether that's the FBI or whomever it was, I thought that was interesting as well, that there seemed to be somebody changing some stuff. And I thought that was interesting, both directions. So you got the grassy knoll and you've got the Texas School Book Depository.
Yes. Now, I'd like to explain right here. It all comes down to, number one, whether it was a conspiracy or not. So to prove that there was a conspiracy, they put themselves in this position that there was only 3 shots fired. Okay. Well, we know that one hit Kennedy in the back, one hit him in the head, and there was one that missed. And then we have Conley being shot. So what they had to do, they had to deal with that because the guy underneath the overpass didn't come out until later after they said there's 3 shots. And Hoover is on the phone with Johnson saying there's 3 shots. One hit the president in the back, one hit Conley, and one hit him in the head that killed him. Okay.
Now, Conley is the man that was in the limo sitting in front of President Kennedy.
Correct.
And he was the governor of Texas. And so I just want to make sure everybody knows who Conley is. Okay, go on.
Okay, so they say only 3 shots came from the rifle that Oswald fired. Well, you have 4 now. So they had to get 4 shots into 3 shots. And Arlen Specter came up with the magic bullet theory. And that is the bullet hit him in the neck, went through. I'm always described this as it did 50 loop-de-loops and right-hand turn and entered Conley and went into his shoulder and then his wrist and then into his thigh. And this magic bullet that surfaced, there's not hardly a scratch on it, okay? But it hit all these bones in the wrist, and that was it. Well, it blows that completely out of the water when you talk to Jim Seibert and you talk to Robert McClellan. I talked to both. Jim Seibert is an FBI agent. They tried to get him to change he never changed what he saw till he died. He never changed it. And they have to deal with it. And that is the shot, he viewed the autopsy, the shot that hit Kennedy in the back was 4.5 inches from the bottom of the neck and 2.5 or 4 inches and 2.5 inches to the right of the spine. And I think your drawing you showed me earlier has that. And that
this one.
Exactly. It's right up here on the back, 7x4. You can see on it. That's exactly where the bullet hit Kennedy, and it only went in 2 inches. In fact, Seibert explained it like the width or the length of your small finger, and you poke a hole in it, and they probe the hole, and it doesn't go through the body. So therefore, they did not come out on the other side. So therefore, the magic bullet didn't happen, and it was puzzling to Humes. It was puzzling to the doctors at Parkland. I mean, not at Parkland, but at Bethesda, that Seibert made a call to the FBI lab and said, "Hey, listen, we have a wound and we don't have a bullet. Do you have such thing as an ice bullet or something? But we don't have the bullet." When the agent in the firearms unit said, "Well, that mystery is now no longer because the Secret Service brought in the bullet that was found on Conley's stretcher." Well, that's the pristine bullet, hardly a marking on it, that went through supposedly Kennedy's neck into the shoulder of Conley and the wrist and then on in. And there's more shrapnel in the wrist than whatever came off that bullet. It didn't happen, okay? But the Warren Commission actually, Gerald Ford admitted in a newspaper article that he moved the location of the wound in the back up to the neck, which made it more logical that the magic bullet did happen. But talking to Robert McClellan, the ER doctor in Parkland, he stated that this bullet was found on a stretcher, unattended stretcher in the hallway, not on Kennedy's stretcher or Gurney or Conley's, and there was no blood on the sheets of that gurney. So I mean, these are actual witnesses that blows the whole thing right out of the water. So now what do? Is you have to, all right, who did it? Who's behind it? And that's basically what I did.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. We're going to keep going. Another shocker from the movie. And I'm not sure that I really understand. So I want to make sure that we cover this. So you have an autopsy. So everything gets taken by the FBI or the Dallas police. I'm not sure which one, but they take it over to Bethesda, and Bethesda is who does the autopsy. They never call or touch base or anything with the Parkland Hospital. And they have in the autopsy, when they do it, they don't have any of the clothing, and they have conflicting wound details like what you just discussed. And so it's like, oh my goodness, the way that, the exit wound and all this other stuff. And just so that everybody understands, from me watching the movie, now I know, because the grassy knoll does get into a little bit of this for a minute, but I wouldn't know what a shotgun shell is supposed to look like. But like you said, that's what makes it the magic bullet, is because there's no way it's going to be shiny like what they suddenly found on a gurney unattended with no blood on it that supposedly went through and did all this stuff. So I just want to make sure that people realize that the testing and everything that they show in the movie, it makes it very clear that there's just no way that all of this going on with Kennedy and Connolly would ever happen, and that bullet still be in such excellent condition. Anything you want to add to that, Zach?
No, exactly what you're saying is right on, but there's no mention of anything and I've read it's a 4.5 page. We used to call them 302s, or well, they still probably call them 302s, but that's what the form is that you put down that could be evidence in court later is the 302. And they basically named every doctor that was in Bethesda. But a lot of people don't realize, the FBI didn't have any jurisdiction at the time on the death or the assassination of a president or anything. That was passed after Kennedy. And the people that should have done the autopsy was the county in Dallas where it happened. And there was an actually fight in the emergency or in the room at Parkland Hospital between Secret Service drew their weapons and threatened them and said, "We're taking the body," and out they went. And it's just amazing when you start looking into it on what actually happened.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So, wow. Okay. K.A. Carlson 00 says that she has a question for you. In the recording of the shooting, what was Jackie reaching for over the back trunk of the sedan after JFK was shot? Why did she turn around and try to go off the back?
She wasn't trying to leave the limo. She was trying to get the brain back that flew out onto the trunk and passed, but she was trying to scoop the brain back in and was going to put it back in her husband's head. She lost it. In fact, she had a piece of bone in her hand all the way to the hospital in the emergency room.
Okay. All right. So Leonard Bell says, I've always heard that you never truly retire from the FBI. Is this true?
I'm retired. I retired before 911, and after when 911 happened, I started my own private investigator firm, and I was I was watching morning news, which I do every day, and I saw the first plane, and they were discussing it, and I'm watching it. When the second plane went in, I said, "Oh my God, we're under attack." So I jumped in the car and I went back to my local FBI office and I wanted my badge back because if you always want to work the big case and you want to be in the action, and that was the biggest thing that ever hit America. And so I wanted my badge back, and I found out agents, retired agents all over the country were doing the same thing I was doing. But no,
Mhm.
they did not give me my badge back. And no, I'm still not with the FBI. I am retired.
All right. All right. The next one. So shocker, the Jack. Okay. So the phone records, you mentioned that. That was one of my shockers. So Jack Ruby kills Oswald 3 days after Oswald supposedly has assassinated the president, right? And so it seems to be easily understood. Ruby was some kind of a mid-level significant mobster in Dallas. He had gotten into narcotics transactions. He wasn't supposed to do that, so he'd kind of been scooted out of the area that he had been in, which I think wasn't that Chicago. And so he got into some
Yes.
trouble. He wasn't supposed to be doing narcotic stuff. So they skedoodled him over to Dallas. I thought it was very interesting. And this is all part of my shocker, was hearing this part about in January, his calls, the level of calls was low. And up until the week before the assassination, it was 25 times what it had been in January when it was low. 25 times. Now we're talking about an 11-month difference. So from January and then leading up to that week before, and then the week before it gets, quiet, no communications by phone, but he gets a visitor, and that's Joe Capizzi. They meet in person. Is that right? It was Joe that came to see him. They meet in person. And then Joe Capizzi is also the man that came to see him while he was in prison. And so I thought that was interesting on November the 30th. So while he was in prison, that happens. Thought that was interesting. I didn't know about the phone records with him. And it was clear, of course, when we go back to what I had said earlier in the show about the three major mafia figures who were discussing, all different kinds of ways to off Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy, President John Kennedy. That was interesting. And I thought, oh goodness, these are shockers for me. The Joe Capizzi guy. So was he pretty high up in the mob? It sounded like he was pretty high up.
Well, he was high up, let's say, in the Dallas area. Okay, and Dallas was not one big. I mean, they were kind of like a subsidiary of New Orleans or Kansas City or whatever. It wasn't a big family, but Campisi was one of the heads of it at that time in Dallas. Yes,
Okay.
and when I first started this, I went to talk to Chauncey Holt's daughter in San Diego, California. Chauncey Holt was a CIA operative. He admits that he was a CIA operative, and that he actually made
Fake IDs.
fake IDs for Lee Harvey Oswald, and because that's what Lee Harvey Oswald was. He was a CIA operative. Okay, and when I went there, of course, I had lunch with an old guy, retired like me, from Chicago. He worked in Chicago and transferred to San Diego, and I hadn't seen him in years, so I decided to have lunch with him. And during the lunch, he asked me what I was doing out there, and I told him for two reasons. Number one, because he asked. Number two was because I wanted to see what kind of vibe I would get from my fellow agent after I told him what I'm doing. And after I said that, and I said, "Well, what do you think?" And he says, "Well, I would think you're crazy, except for one thing." And I love those one things. And I
Yeah.
said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, you remember Pendorf, which is an operation we had going in Chicago at the time. I was there on Alan Dorfman. Alan Dorfman was the guy that was the man that set up the casinos and got the money out of the union to do the casinos. The movie Casino, but with
Mhm.
Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro. You aware
Yeah.
of that movie? Yeah,
Yes.
that's what we worked at the time. That's what we were working. And he said, what got me is that he was Hoffa's running buddy, but he was Dorfman's. And they're sitting on the wire when this, I can't remember his name now, but he said that Jack Ruby called him several times before the assassination. And he said that always bothered me because just like me, we were told they didn't have any organized crime connections that Ruby did. So I flew back to Texas and I was going to Chicago the following week. And I said, who in the heck am I that thinks I have all this information? It's got to be other agents, retired agents that. So I met with some in Chicago and I got leads all over the place. And that's where I found out about Jim Seibert, about the agent that viewed the autopsy. And I went and talked to him. Mike Wax, who is on the documentary, he was the undercover man to Carlos Macello. And how many times Carlos Macello mentioned you can't cut it. In order to get rid of the snake, you can't cut the tail off. You got to cut the head off. So they couldn't get rid of Bobby. They had to get rid of Jack. So it was very interesting to see the help
Marcello,
I got. Yeah.
and I just want to insert here for the viewers, Marcello was one of the 3 major mafia figures that had been discussing killing, one or both of the Kennedys. We're talking about earlier that summer and spring. So just want to make sure that people remember that. So this gentleman that Zach is referring to right now is one of those 3 major mafia figures. And so that's interesting.
Michelle,
Wow.
it just so happens that Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle worked for Carlos Macello also.
Of course.
I mean, it's stuff we can't explain it in an hour. Okay.
Yeah.
You need to watch the documentary.
And that does help too. Yeah. Okay. So number 7 of my shockers, because, I had plenty, was, well, there were a few things here that I didn't care for. Let me back up. So number 7 would have been how Ruby said, you're never gonna so in so many words he was saying he saying that the truth wouldn't come out, that people would never really know the truth. But I never knew that he had said that he would review the true story of the assassination if he was moved to DC. From Dallas, because he was so scared to be in Dallas, and said that if he was moved there for protection, but of course the transfer never came and it was authorized by federal authorities. I was surprised about that. I had never heard that, I'd never heard an explanation for why Kennedy was assassinated. And so when I heard all this, it was like, oh my goodness, I didn't know all this stuff. And so, but then to hear him say that, I will tell the truth. I will tell you all the story behind the assassination, but I just got to be moved to DC because, it's too dangerous here for me. And then when you see in the documentary, you end up seeing him in the video footage of, I don't know what the deal is. He's talking about the vice president. I mean, it sounded like to me it was implicating Johnson, of course.
Yes.
Ruby, out of Ruby's mouth.
Yeah, I think he was too. I thoroughly believe that Johnson knew it was going to happen. And
yes.
I don't have anything as far as saying what role he had.
Well, wait a minute. Don't we really kind of have some proof of that? I mean, on some level, because there was the dismissal. Was it, let's see, the Dallas, there was a draft of, I wrote this down. It was a draft. And I found this very interesting. The National Security Action Memo 263. Okay, yes. So the day before John Kennedy was assassinated, there was an initial draft that was made. Right. This is in the movie.
Yeah.
And Kennedy was in Texas the day before. So he wasn't even in DC. And so there was a draft. And so that draft was about returning all the U.S. troops by the end of 1963 from Vietnam. And John Kennedy was in DC the day before the assassination. And that was the day of the initial draft that was, rescinding that and saying, they undid that draft or that memo. And I said, that is not good news right there.
Yeah. I can tell you, I did talk to a person secondhand to me, but firsthand to him, Senator Yarborough from Texas rode in the limo with Johnson, who you have Kennedy, Secret Service, then Johnson. So he's in the vehicle with Johnson, Thornburg, and he says to this particular, and he worked for Jim Garrison. That's when Garrison had that probe in 1968 or 67 on Clay Shaw on the JFK assassination. That the
Hmm.
movie
Hmm.
JFK, okay, Oliver
Yeah.
Stone, okay,
Yeah.
and in fact Kevin Costner plays Jim
Yeah.
Garrison, and that Yarborough told him that when they turned off of Main Street onto Houston, and you have a whole block, and then you take a left on right in front of the book depository on Elm, that so you got a block and a quarter or a block and a half of time that Johnson started slumping in his seat when they turned onto Houston. That was told to an individual who told me.
Okay, well, that makes sense to me, and I'm going to tell you why. Because when you watch the grassy knoll, what does he say to Hoover? Wasn't it Hoover he was talking to? And he wanted to know, did anybody
Shot at me. Yeah,
take a shot at me?
right.
I think he was trying to figure out if anybody was after him too.
Yeah,
Like, is anybody double crossing me? I'm in
exactly.
on it, but wait a minute, maybe I'm not. I think
Yeah.
I'm in on it. So when he asked that, and now you're telling me this, yeah, I'm smelling skunk, y'all.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 8, let's see here. So on 11/22, the day that Kennedy was assassinated, the Dallas police. So the same day, the Dallas police informed J. Edgar Hoover of they inform Hoover that they have suspicions they have other suspects. I'm sorry. And they inform him of other suspects. I can't read my own handwriting. I'm left-handed. And so Hoover dismisses it prior to Oswald even being charged. And so I thought that was very interesting. It indicates that the minds were made up. And then, of course, I made a note about the affidavits being edited. All of that was a shocker to me. Even after all, now it's believable because of all of the stuff that my viewers and I now know about what all goes on. But this was quite the shocker for me to hear that they already knew other people were involved the same day he was assassinated, and all of that stuff got dismissed and pushed off. I thought it was interesting also, not necessarily a shocker, but I thought it was interesting kind of how it was laid out about how J. Edgar Hoover didn't cooperate. So what happens is you have the Warren Commission, and you had Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice of the U.S., right? And so they turn over the investigative responsibilities and delegate it to the FBI. And so they're really successful in covering up what all had happened. I thought that was interesting. And one of the tactics, I think, from everything that you all lay out in the movie, and I'm just coming out and saying it specifically, is that it sounds like to me this was another one of the ways that they were covering things up. He wouldn't cooperate. And so even to the point that on December the 16th, 63, which you're talking about almost a month later, that the people that were doing all of this stuff had to do some kind of file something for data. I wasn't familiar with that. Maybe you can fill in some blanks on that. But, they were appointed by the president, but yet the president had said, well, Hoover's in charge, and, you get the data from him, but Hoover wouldn't give it to them. And then publicly, the president is talking about how wonderful Hoover is. And so there was clearly conspiracy and cover up. And I thought that was very interesting.
Well, J. Edgar Hoover and LBJ were tight. I mean, they were neighbors. J. Edgar Hoover was, I think I'm correct on this, one of the daughters of Johnson's. Hoover was her godfather. So that's how close they were. So they were pretty much in bed together. So nothing surprises me between Hoover and JFK. And
You mean Johnson?
I mean, Johnson's correct. I'm
Okay.
sorry. The thing about it is, having been in under J. Edgar Hoover for approximately 2 years. He ruled the FBI with a thumb. I mean, just whatever he said was gospel. So when agents are told that we have the suspect in custody, we have the suspect. That's the way. You see, in a major investigation like that, you have two boxes. You have the box that you're looking at to go forth with and indict this particular individual, and anything that doesn't make sense stays in this box. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you're working a case out of this. And that was pretty much Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone assassin. Let's prove it. Okay. That's basically the way they conducted that, which is not right. You got to look at all avenues. And there's a lot of stuff in this box over here to the right that needs to be looked at. And I always say when I do any talks, he signs that memo and says we have suspect in custody, no longer to cover it.
Mm.
I've never solved a case that fast in a couple hours, especially a case like that. I mean, there's just no way.
And that's literally what we're talking about.
That's
You
literally
know,
what we're talking about.
I literally just laid that out, that it was on the same day that the Dallas police, on the same day that Kennedy was assassinated, reaches out, lets him know, hey, there's some other suspects here, and he dismisses the whole thing. And Oswald has not even been charged yet. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understood the timeline on that. I was very surprised about the timeline.
Yes, very much so. And the other thing that's really interesting too is the fact that here you have a guy that goes into this theater. And now what's he doing up there? Number one, he didn't have enough time to kill Tibbet. He did not kill Tibbet. Okay. I went to Dallas probably in 2000 or 2001 and reviewed a lot of stuff that was in a file cabinet in Chief Curry's office that this lieutenant or captain, retired, he was a PI also, let me look at. And when I'm looking at it one day, he's not there. The next day he comes in and what's this all about, Zach? And I told him, and he said, oh, conspiracy. Well, number one, I'm the one that did the timeline on Lee Harvey Oswald. He did not have enough time to get to where Tibbet was killed. He's seen here, seen there. He didn't kill Tibbet. That was mind blowing to me. So, I mean, anytime you look into this, you come up with something else that just blows your mind that we didn't do.
Mhm.
That the FBI didn't conduct, the toll records, who in fact called, that Ruby's calls were to, and it just wasn't done.
Well, I know that there are many people that seem to be very convinced that the shooter, that there was one shooter, and that the shooter was the driver. And so I do know that much. And when I asked you the first time we spoke, what did you say? Do you remember? You
That's,
talked about conspiracy,
yeah,
and
talk
that is
about
absolutely.
conspiracy and all the fake stories or all the other stories that get thrown out there to take you off the real one.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute, because this is very timely, especially with a number of things that I talk about with other guests like Mike Gill, who's a corruption whistleblower. We talk about this. We talk about how fake things get inserted or details get twisted. There's many things that I see. I just got a call last night. There are so many times that they don't even care about the facts. They didn't even close to the facts of anything. And I know because they're talking about me. And so it's impossible. So here's the thing. It's like, when I talked with you, I thought it was so interesting because you're like, oh yeah, this happens all the time. And so have you seen that before, where it's the government? Like, have you ever ended up realizing, okay, wait a minute, it's either the FBI or it's the military, or have you seen that? Or what do you mean by things get pulled in, and sometimes it's 20% not true and the rest is true? And like you said when we were on the phone, you're like, and then there's times it's all just, a whole storyline is 100% not true.
Well, I didn't question anything until I came to this. And when I got inside of it, I'm going, holy cow. what is going on in this country. The fact that uh, we know it's a conspiracy. We know some of the actors. Why is it still covered up today? Um, I was put in touch, and I hate to go off on this, but this is basically the same thing. It's been going on for a long time. Uh, with the person, you heard of Admiral Kimball? Admiral Kimball was the Navy admiral in Pearl Harbor who took all the blame for when Japan came in and that they were
Okay.
not ready. Well, I was in touch with his grandson, Tom Kimball, and he was an FBI agent. And he knows for a fact that Roosevelt knew they were coming, but we wanted to jump into World War II. And that was a good way for the American people to say, okay, we're ready to go to war.
Hmm.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
just throwing that out there because then I realized this has been done during periods of time. And I don't want to get into the day, but yeah, there's things that I look at that one news media is saying, I know is completely false.
Well, and then what about, I mean, even what are your thoughts about the fact that I just read yesterday that President Trump is saying that he was begged by Mike Pompeo to not release the Kennedy documents and not to let the American people know all of the details. What are your thoughts about that? And what do you suspect is in those documents? Or do you have any suspicions of what would be in those for Pompeo to be begging Trump to not release them back when he was president in his first term?
Well, Michelle, it has to be my own personal opinion. And my own personal opinion, if the American people really knew what happened, it would burst their bubble. We live in, our government doesn't lie to us. Okay. And maybe in some instances they have to get the job done. But CIA at that time, still does, I think, operates with no immunity. Well, I mean, with completely immunity.
Yeah.
There's nobody no checks and balances on them,
Hmm.
which the FBI has, or which all the other federal agencies have. Um, yeah, there's a lot going on we probably don't know.
So you think it'd be a rude awakening for many to learn who was really behind it
The
and what
JFK
all was going
assassination,
on?
yes,
That's a good point. What about in your investigations and everything? The people I know you've gotten to talk to some great people that were there in different aspects and different ways they know things. What about I call him Daddy Bush, George Bush? There's a photo that's grainy that supposedly him that day he supposedly claims he doesn't remember where he was when Kennedy got shot, which I find hard to believe because it's kind of like for my generation, where you were when they said that Obama was, not Obama, the football player, OJ, OJ was acquitted. Everybody knows where they were. And so I find that hard to believe. My mother-in-law, who's 83 years old, 84 years old, says that, oh yeah, because I asked her about it. I said, does everybody know where they were? She's like, oh yeah, you know where you were when you heard.
Know exactly where I was.
Okay. So, and I've heard this over and over and over. So I find that hard to believe he doesn't know where he was. And then I hear also there's receipts that show that he was at a hotel just around the corner from where President Kennedy was assassinated. So have you looked into any of that? And what do you know about that? As far as where his location was he present?
No, I would have to say I haven't looked into that. There's a whole bunch that I have not looked at. Okay, because there's a whole bunch of there. I mean, there's supposed to be a meeting the night before with some very big people, and I don't know for a fact, but supposedly the mistress of LBJ talked about that meeting, and it was at a very big businessman's home. There's a lot of stuff that I have not looked into.
Okay, that's good. All right. So the next question I have for you is, who do you believe, with all of your research, killed JFK? Who do you believe it is? Do you believe James Files? I'd never heard of him either until I got to digging into all of this and talking with you and Michael, which is Rose Cherami's son. So I've learned more about him and there's a little bit of a clip in the documentary Grassy Knoll about him. So what is your thoughts about all of this, and who do you believe, who all was involved? Oh, and I want to back up first. So you've got the underpass, the Grassy Knoll, right? And you've also got the Texas School Book Depository. Was the limo in between both of those?
No, it's past the book depository.
Okay.
And,
So
and
the
it's
Grassy
coming
Knoll?
up onto Grassy Knoll, which is basically to the right and off to the side of where they were.
So had the limo already passed the depository?
Yes.
And it was on its way to the Grassy Knoll. So it was in between the two locations.
Right. Those two.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get. That's yes. So the answer would be yes then. Okay.
But according to the people we've talked to, Chuck Nicoletti was in the Dowtex building, not in the Texas Depository building. The Dowtex building is right across the street from the book depository. And it makes more sense the shot came from there.
Mm-hmm. Because like what you say, is that, okay, so let me make sure I understand why it would make more sense. Is that because of something that you told me before that is, and I hate the graphic details of this, but the brain splatter was behind him. It was an exit wound. Is that right?
That would be the shot from the Grassy Knoll.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so who do you believe was all involved in it? Do you believe Oswald was one of the shooters?
I don't think no, I think he was the patsy, just like he said he was.
Yeah.
Okay. And Files, I can't be for certain that he took the shot, but I think he was there. And I also think that there's no doubt in my mind that Chuck Nicoletti was there, and there's no doubt that John Roselli was there, and others. Now, what's the other words? I don't know.
Are those two guys mobsters or hitmen, or who are they?
Roselli, and yes, Roselli was the a guy named Mayhew. Robert Mayhew was a former FBI agent that put the mob and the CIA together to kill Castro. Introduced Sam Giancana to a CIA operative or CIA agent or whatever to kill Castro. There was going to be poison passed and they were going to kill Castro. And I really believe the same people that were put together to kill Castro killed Kennedy.
Okay, makes sense. All right, let's go through some of these viewer comments and questions. Zach, so Deborah Lynn W. says, living in the Chicago area my entire life, I've known since I was very young that the mob helped get Kennedy elected because my father told me. My father had a very strong dislike for Kennedy. Well, when you watch the movie The Grassy Knoll, they give you some very specific stats and stuff, so you'll end up realizing your daddy was right. He got help. If those stats are accurate, which I don't have any reason to believe they weren't, but it sounded very interesting. And like I said, I'd learned that years ago, but was just surprised to hear such a thing years ago, but now not surprised because I already knew that piece of information. If you didn't, it'll be a shocker. Southern Georgia says, what about the guys in the trench coats with the long guns in the field on the side of Mrs. Kennedy? Is she talking about the Grassy Knoll? She goes, is that factual or made up, or is that something else? Because she's calling it a field. So in the field on the side of Mrs. Kennedy.
I'm unaware of men in trench coats with whatever. I'm unaware of that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Leonard Bell says, how is it after all of this time that no one knows exactly what happened? I find that so hard to believe. Oh, so I think some people know exactly, but like Jack Ruby got killed. So because he was going to talk. Oh.
Well, yeah, there were very few living that were actually there. I did talk to he was a congressman that was there, and I tried to talk to him, and he when I approached him to talk, he basically looked at me, and I knew the guy. He says, "What do you know?" And I finally got up to him, shook his hand. Congressman, how you doing? He says, what do you know? I said, well, that's not what I know. I want to know what you know, because he was there. And he made a comment before that he knows it was a shot from a Grassy Knoll because he was a former Marine, as I was, and knows gunshots, and that there was a shot from a Grassy Knoll. And he proceeded to lie to me that day because he said 3 shots from the rear, lone assassin. If you think you got anything, take it to the FBI. And
Mm.
after that, that man would never speak to me again. So I'm keeping tabs with one of the family members that's supposed to tell me one day, but what he meant by that and what he knew. But this particular family member tells me today that I'm on the right track, according to
Wow.
a
Yeah.
congressman back at
And
that time.
when you get scoop, you got to call me.
Oh yeah. Well, hopefully I can get the scoop. Somebody's got to die, and I hope it's not me.
You get the scoop. You got to call
Yeah,
me and tell me so we can put you
yeah.
on the show. We'll do it. Okay. So Leonard Bell, yeah. And you know what I wonder, Leonard Bell? I wonder if, in 50 years, 60 years, our great grandkids and our grandkids going to be talking about who tried to, take the shot at Trump and all of that. And, somebody told somebody this or that at a, over a dinner. And so it'll just be interesting. I wonder that sometimes, Zach,
Well,
All right.
Michelle, I can tell you this. I was headed to, matter of fact, I'm a big LSU fan. I was headed to an LSU game, and I happened to spend the night on the 50th anniversary, and I'm watching on TV everything that's occurring. And Pat Buchanan, I don't know if you remember, he ran for
Yes.
president on a Republican ticket, was on and said, there's no, it wasn't a conspiracy, legal Harvey Oswald, but there's one thing that still bothers me. And that's what I'm talking about, that one thing. I love when there's
Oh,
one thing
yeah.
that bothers me.
That's when you
And
find out something good.
that's the fact of experts tried the shot with that rifle and couldn't do it within 5 point whatever seconds it was. And he said that's always bothered me. And I jumped. I was kind of laying up in bed, and my wife and I were watching. I jumped out on the floor and I said, "Well, good night. There you go." It didn't happen. I mean, it didn't happen that way. So
Yeah.
yeah, I always.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I called another researcher and I told him, "Man, I'm just down and out about all this." And he said, "Zach," he says, "the work you have done, the work other researchers has done, one day, and it will probably won't be in our lifetime, but it'll all come together just like the Lincoln or whatever, and it will get solved one day. People will know
All
it."
right. All right.
So
Let's go on to the next one. That's good. A.N. Cabral says, let's see, they say that Trump was shocked when he found out about it. That is why he didn't release the files. So whatever it was. Okay. That's interesting. D.I. Laughing says, does Mr. Shelton believe that President Trump will release the JFK files? And if the files do get released, what does Mr. Shelton believe that they will show?
I really think I know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. feels the same way I do because I've heard him speak, and I think he thinks it was the mob that did it, along with the CIA,
Hmm.
people
Yeah.
within the CIA. And I think that's what Trump, you know, I think he finally will. And I think the American people are ready. I don't think they were ready 10 years ago, but I think the American people are ready now to hear the truth. And I
What
think
do
they
you
can
think has
handle it.
what do
Do
you
what?
think that what do you think has changed in that 10 years to make people ready now that they weren't ready 10 years ago?
I think they've seen a lot of corruption that is going on. And I don't really want to name what it is, but I think they have, their eyes are starting to be open, I think. I'm
Yeah.
hoping.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's at a level now where it's undeniable for many.
correct.
I was in that 10 years ago. I mean, I tell people all the time, I didn't really start paying attention to politics and stuff until the day that Donald Trump went down the escalator and he started talking about illegal immigration. And I thought, was this that big of a thing? And so I started asking questions and talking with people and finding out, and paying attention and doing research and so, and then on January the 1st, 2020, I saw a documentary and that was it. That started a whole line of dominoes to where I started spending 60 to 80 hours a week just learning, and watching documentaries and reading books. I read a ton of books that year. And so, and it, it's opened my eyes, and it was hard, but, and there were times where, I just couldn't hardly believe what I was reading. And what's so amazing to me and personally is I never even heard a whisper about a conspiracy theory about anything, not even 9/11. I even believed 9/11. I had never heard anything. And so it wasn't until that fall in 2020 when I listened to an international flight attendant on an interview. I forget her name, but we're getting ready to run her stuff again. And I've reached out to her. It's my understanding she's still alive, but she's not responded. And so we tried to get her on the show around 9/11 last year, but she talked about all kinds of things in that interview. And by the end of that hour, I couldn't believe the stuff I'd been believing. And so the truth of the things that have come out that I've learned actually makes way more sense. Just like what you're saying, it's all this makes sense. It's like, okay, well, how did one person do all this? And when you start naming off all of these different facts, it's like, oh yeah, none of this makes any sense. But you got to know all this. And that I asked a friend who had been in the military, and her expertise was in explosives. And so I asked her about a year and a half ago, I said, okay, well, when did you know? Like, when did you know that the 9/11 thing, had explosives and was controlled demolition? And she goes, oh, that day. As soon as I saw it, I told my husband, he thought I was crazy. And she said, I told him, I said, that's controlled demolition right there. And she would know. And so, that's the kind of stuff I think maybe more people have found out about it and learn. And there's more shows like mine where we talk about some of these things and show the footage and all the different stuff. And so, because they're like, a lot of people I think were like me, never heard a whisper about any of it. It wasn't that I chose not to believe it. I didn't even know it was up for grabs. If I wanted to get what was going on, I turned the TV on. And what I ended up learning and realizing is that was probably the last thing I should have been doing, was turning the TV on. And so, so it was very interesting to see how I think a lot of people have evolved. And I thought the government worked in our best interest. I didn't know anything different. And what I've come to realize is that's just not the case. What has been hard for me, though, and I say hard, not really hard, but when I look at these notes, as I was taking the notes and watching the grassy knoll, it's realizing, it's not even been the last 10 years or even 9/11. We're talking, it's not even our whole lives, this generation. It's been going on. This represents so much ugly. And this was over 60 years ago. And so there's so much in the grassy knoll that runs parallel to so many other things, that before it and after it. But this is just undeniable. That's why I said I watched it twice already and was looking. I've been very excited about having you on today. And that's why, because it really helped me to realize the degree of deception. And if people could really, and Mike Gill has helped me with this, who's a whistleblower, corruption whistleblower. He's been dealing with this for 18 years and fighting the cartel and drug trafficking, gun trafficking, all this different stuff. And so in our conversations, he made fun and joked with me recently, and he goes, yeah, a year ago you were like, but they're lying, and I'm like, meaning I couldn't believe someone would lie a year ago. So I have come so far, and I think that so has my audience and so many others as well, Zach. And I really hope you're right. I hope that there are so many people that are now ready that might not have been ready 10 years ago.
Yeah. And the way I describe all that, Michelle, is this. When somebody tells you that this is white, after about the 20th time, you go, well, you know what? It looks white. And that's what we've been told time and time again. Leo Harvey Oswald, the lone assassin, the lone assassin, the lone assassin. And everybody has grown up that he's the lone assassin. They don't question it. And that's how they control. So.
Now you've had this awareness so much longer. I think sometimes I'm like, now I understand the depth of the saying, ignorance is bliss. I think,
Yeah.
gosh, so I was living in my own little world, but what has that been like for you, knowing something's not adding up here, and it's been for so many years.
Yeah, I guess you just walk around going, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, and try to do the best you can. And that's one reason when Mike Fulgen said that you would like me on a show. And I said, well, that's why I did it. I mean, that's why I went off into it, is because I'd like other people to know it too.
Yeah.
And
The education side of it. What about
exactly.
when Trump said that he wasn't going to, just on a personal level? I get what we're talking about with the 10 years and people are ready now and can handle it, you believe. But what was that like for you? Was it personally a disappointment? Is it personally frustrating? What is that like for you?
Well, evidently there is something in there. And I spoke in 2017 at a convention in Dallas, and I basically I know everybody's anxious about the files that Trump's going to release, but I said, if they lied to us then, you think you're going to find anything now? What's going to be taken out of there? What's going to be redacted from it? So I don't know. I
I
don't know.
can't imagine if those things are redacted, that ain't going to be good.
No, it's not.
You know what I
But
mean? Okay. Leonard Bell
thank
is
you.
at, yes. Leonard Bell was asking, as a retired FBI official, are you bound by non-disclosure? I know of someone who was with the Secret Service has shared a bit about, but is bound by non-disclosure. Do you have any non-disclosures you have to deal with as an FBI agent?
Well, there's nothing that I'm saying that's
Part of the FBI. You
yeah,
did this
that
on your own
I did
for the
this on
most
my
part.
own. Yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
That's interesting. Brandy Davenport said, I wonder if Daddy Bush not only planned it, but followed through. Just wondering. I thought it was interesting. Use Faith Daily said, thoughts on Mossad ordering the assassination because JFK didn't want Israel's nuke program to move forward. Is there anything that you've come across that had anything to do with the Mossad?
No.
Okay. Is really the mob mad? Bobby. Oh, thank you so much, Zach. You've just been such a
Okay.
delight. And yes, Mike Fulgens was here last week. And so you and Mike are friends. And just so
Yes.
everybody knows, so Mike Fulgens, who's with Universal Coin and Bullion, he is the one that introduced me to Zach and kept telling me even last year, you got to meet my friend, Zach Shelton, and you got to watch The Grassy Knoll. He says it's so good. And so thank you so much, Zach. I just
Okay.
really appreciate you. Thank you, honey. All right. So let's see. We got another viewer that says, Michelle, I am a very trusting person. So if somebody tells me something, I just believe them. And my husband is the opposite. But now after doing so much research, I've learned a lot. That's exactly it. But like, I think there's the difference that I said a little bit ago, that point is very important. It wasn't that I heard, oh yeah, 9/11 conspiracy theory, is inside job. They were wiring that sucker up, 2 weeks earlier. No, I never heard a single whisper, not one. So it wasn't like I wasn't believing it because I chose not to believe it. I never heard a thing. That's what's so incredible to me. It's like as connected as I am and around friends and business people through all of that time, I just was so surprised. Red Keller Williams, Nashville. I was around so many people. I never heard a whisper about any of that. And so I don't know, maybe I was hanging out with other people that didn't know anything about it, but it just blows my mind how I lived in this country all this time and didn't hear all that. But the second I started digging and realizing, yeah, I'm like you research and you learn a lot about the ways of the world. And what's really going on. So I think it's all really interesting. And again, thank you so much to Mike Fulgens. He's with Universal Coin and Bullion. And I just appreciate him making this connection for me, for you guys. And so without him doing that, we wouldn't have been able to have today's show. And it's so good. So I do recommend The Grassy Knoll. If you go to the Rumble channel for the Michelle Moore Show and then go into the show description, producer Ron has already put a link in there for you to be able to watch it. Producer Ron was thinking it was like $2.99 or something. It's not much. And so there was some cost behind there. Actually, Zach was not the producer. He doesn't own the rights. He was just in it. And so he's not making any money or anything. It's just the producer owns it, and there's expenses with that. And I did communicate with him as well, trying to get it for you guys to be able to see for free. And maybe we wanted to run it even on the channel for you, but that wasn't an option. And so, but we do highly recommend that you watch it. All right. We'll see you tomorrow with Mike Gill right here, our corruption whistleblower. We got all kinds of stuff we're going to be covering. Court update. There's all kinds of stuff going on with the courts. And so we're going to be talking about all of that and hot topics and reading the board. And so excited about that. So we'll see you right here next time on the Michelle Moore Show.
I'm Dr. Fulgens. For over 30 years, UCB has helped customers strengthen portfolios with gold. But let them tell you in their own words.
Buying gold and silver from Universal Coin and Bullion has been one of the greatest experiences for me, and it's been an easy process and also a very safe process to do that.
Call now to secure your 1-ounce gold or silver American Eagle coin with no dealer markup.
Did you know your cell phone emits radiation that has been linked to increased risk of certain types of cancers? This is why manufacturers include hidden warnings to keep your phone away from your body. And what's worse is that children are more susceptible to the potentially damaging effects. Safe Sleeve for cell phones is a case specifically designed to block radiation. Its shielding technology integrated into the case has been tested in a third-party FCC-accredited lab to block over 99% of RF and 92% of ELF radiation emitted by your phone. It also functions as a stand for watching videos and comes in a magnetically detachable style for some devices. Safe Sleeve also offers anti-radiation cases for tablets and laptops and has free shipping in the U.S. plus discounted worldwide shipping is available. Go to truthtalkamerica.com today and click on the Safe Sleeve banner on the home page. Use the discount code FIRST10 at checkout for 10% off your first order.
Are you tired of all the pills in your medicine cabinet? I'm Linda Bamber Olson, the creator of the Wave Watch, a more natural approach with 1,000 frequencies for mind and body. You've got to hear some testimonies from people just like you. I absolutely love this Wave Watch. It has helped me with occasional aches, cramps in my muscles. I twisted my knee a month ago, and the Wave Watch has helped tremendously with the pain while healing. And how about this one from Debbie in Colorado? My left leg was hurt bad enough that I would cry when walking to the doctor. Doctor appointments are $170 and chiropractic sessions were $45 many times for the last 2 years. My hands and neck are stiff. My leg quit throbbing within 5 minutes of the session for bursitis, and 2 hours later, still no pain. Why not try the Wave Watch with 1,000 different self-care ideas and put your mind at ease?
Go to wavewatch.com. At checkout, use the code Michelle100 to receive $100 savings on your purchase.
For Michelle's social media links, go to MichelleMooreShow.com.